Hello guys, how's it going? My name is Dalaran, and in today's video we'll be talking about loot as well as gear. Gear and loot, which is something that I feel a lot of us can agree we can't get enough of when it comes to raiding as well as Mythic Pluses in particular. And it looks like Blizzard is looking at potentially addressing some of these issues, maybe in the future patch update. Something like a 9.0.5 or better yet a 9.1. Which could be actually around the corner, and I guess we'll know about it soon, maybe in like 2 weeks or so. But anyway, let's dive into the topic of loot and how Blizzard is maybe even thinking of approaching this, and some of my suggestions as to what they should do in order to make getting loot, primarily from raiding but also Mythic Pluses in particular, a lot better, as it seems like the PvP side of the game is actually quite healthy. So the background of this footage is actually going to be me running a Sanguine 17 with a Frost Mage. So all of you guys have been playing off-meta specs that maybe you thought, hey, is it a possibility for me to play a spec that I like that might not be the most popular one? Is there potential? Is there opportunity? I say there always is. So enjoy some gameplay in the background. The Mage actually bumped quite a bit. But let's start talking about gear. I feel like a lot of us can agree. Gearing alts right now is a lot easier if you're primarily gearing alts for PvP. The Conquest vendor and the Honor vendor is probably the best thing the Blizzard could have brought back in this expansion. You grind BGs for Honor, and you grind arenas as well as rated RBGs for Conquest. And then you upgrade all that gear back with Honor. So there's always this kind of loop of you doing PvP of some sort. Go into PvP, get PvP gear, do better in PvP with that PvP gear. The gear also can be used in dungeons as well as in raids, with the DRs that we'll have for secondary stats, where let's say you stack too much mastery, eventually a point of mastery doesn't give you enough stuff. It's actually pretty decent gear in the long run. It'll be good for a variety of content. It's something that can be done solo in PvP. You can do it with pugs, you can do it with RBG groups or with twos, you could do a bunch of caps and such. Like, it's a nice system that can be done by yourself working towards certain goals. That is a little bit different than the PvE system. In raids as well as in dungeons, you need groups, you need pugs, and if you've ever tried to do Mythic Pluses or raids this season, I think you will know what I mean. I'd say that the content this season for PvE is generally harder. Now, normal and LFR raids isn't going to be no difficulty, but getting your 10s for Mythic Pluses, I feel like is a bit of a hurdle. I mean, 15s nowadays on my main are not that difficult once you have the gear, but before you get the gear, the mechanics really are important. You do need coordination, and you don't have dungeons that are nearly as easily ran as some of the earlier expansions. Not everything is going to be freehold. In fact, none of these dungeons really feel all that free, especially depending on the affixes. And the raids, I feel like there's actually quite a bit of mechanics. Unless you have gear to just overwhelm the content, you actually have to pay attention, which is interesting because I felt like in the last expansion, your normal and heroic versions of the same fights just didn't have enough going on, but the mythic is where it finally became interesting. So I would say that the content for PvE this expansion so far is generally harder than it was, at least the average of content that you had in the last expansion, Battle for Azeroth. So this content is harder, but also some of you figured out that it probably doesn't reward nearly as much gear as you would have hoped. PvP gearing is great. There's just plenty of time of you to commit time into the PvP content and grind out the points, and it's all time commitment, doesn't really need groups. For PvE, there's a lot less gear that's getting thrown at you. It requires groups, and it requires coordination for those groups. So it's something that becomes kind of difficult for you to even pug around. This becomes a lot more apparent when it comes to gearing your alts. As in previous expansions, you would just, let's say, get a decent ready IO and dive into a bunch of keys and collect a bunch of gear. A lot of it wasn't that good for you, but it had a variety of stats that at least was decent enough for you to get started and playing and get invited into more groups. With this expansion, however, gear means a lot more, and even jumping 10 item levels is a huge advancement for a character, but that also means the gear drops a lot less often. So getting your alts up and running with some gear, it does seem like, unless you PvP, there's no real easy ways of going about it. Even Blizzard recognized the problem, as we actually have an interview with Ian, as well as a quote from that interview that kind of showcases that Blizzard does have their finger on the pulse. One big topic of discussion has been the way loot works in Shadowlands endgame. We significantly reduce the rate at which players earn item rewards but at the same time also stripped away randomness and tried to give everyone more clear goals to pursue and control over their progress towards them. When it comes to PvP itemization specifically, we're really happy with how that played out. We think we could do more to make the experience of running dungeons and raids feel more satisfying when you don't get a specific item you were hoping for. A couple things that could be mentioned here. I am glad that Blizzard did strip away a lot of the randomness. I don't think systems like Warforging and Titan Forging should come back to the game. Some of you guys actually enjoyed those systems, especially if you're someone who didn't really do a lot of challenging content. You maybe done your normals, or did a lot of LFRs, or did some lower end keys, and it was kind of exciting from a world quest to get some trinket that just randomly Titan forged 20, 30, 40 plus item levels just for no reason. It was exciting and allowed a lot of the casual players to be able to pick up some gear and feel like there's some sort of progress, even though it was all completely RNG. But we can all agree randomness and having the game steeped in randomness for too long is probably not a good thing. It's not going to go in a good direction, and I think it's going to make more people unhappy than anyone happy. So that definitely had to go. However, I think there are some things we can do in order to make the experience of not receiving what you were looking for, what you were farming for, what you were grinding for, a little bit better. And Blizzard kind of stated themselves is primarily maybe looking at a system where you might be able to have some targeted pieces even though you don't get that piece after running the RNG of raids or dungeons over and over. So a lot of us were thinking possibly points, some sort of a point system or a currency system for doing dungeons and raids, similar to what they had back in Cataclysm with the Justice point system and the Valor point system. They might have had a very similar system back in Wrath, but I didn't really play in Wrath, so I'm going to go over the system that I remember back from Cataclysm, or at least anything close to it. So what if they added some kind of a system like this into the game? I think it would be an interesting thing to try, and I think if anything this would have to go on PTR for people to really test. How well would this work? I do like the idea that gear now matters a lot more. And even if, let's say, sometimes I don't get super lucky on the item that I need, once I get it, that's it. I have my best in slot and I can't ever change it. It is my perfect piece, and it's going to also increase the value of my character, not only in the item level, but also in performance, as gear makes a massive difference in terms of how well our characters perform right now. So I like the essence of how gear works and how much it means to characters and just how much of an impact it has right now. But I do think that maybe we could do some things in order to make gear a little bit easier to access, especially if you're someone who is regularly grinding high-end content. Some of the things I think Blizzard should address, and maybe the point system might be enough or might not be, but I think doing high-end Mythic Plus keys should probably reward you better gear, maybe past level 15s. Let's say you have a group that does 20s all the time. 20s are not easy to do. The content is actually quite challenging, and even though it's easy to make a group of 5 people together, to push up to a 20 is quite difficult. And I feel like Blizzard should add more rewards for pushing higher end content even in 5-mans. 5-mans used to be easy in the last expansion in comparison. So if they were as easy as they were in BFA, then yeah, I could see why you wouldn't want people to get showered with loot. But now the content is challenging, I think past 15s should still offer gear, and you should be able to farm up gear with the 5-man squad that you got going on at a more challenging content. 15s, 14s, that's something people do for their weeklies. People pushing for like 16s, 17s, 18s, 19s, and towards 20s. I feel like if a group literally spams 20s all day, they should be geared out head to toe in mythic raid loot. The content is as difficult, and in some cases even more difficult, than getting a full raid mythic group together. Another thing that I think Blizzard should take a look at, and they might end up doing this with some catch-ups. Eventually Blizzard does add up catch-up mechanisms for your alts, especially for gaining gear, but I was a huge fan of just how much loot dropped from normal inside of time walking raids. Blizzard did nerf this, but I really think they shouldn't, and maybe they should reconsider maybe allowing more loot to drop from stuff like normal Castle Nathria. I mean, the gear from there isn't amazing. You're not going to be able to dive into mythics immediately. It's just something to let your alts catch up. I really do hope they reconsider this choice going forward, but maybe they already have a catch-up mechanism for your alts very soon, and we'll find out about it in a couple of weeks. If Blizzard can solve these two things in the future, I would be very happy. But we'll see, maybe this new point system or a potential point system will be the solution that we all have been waiting for. I am actually very interested to see what they have for a future patch of Shadowlands. Let me know what you think about this video, guys, and the topic. what do you think Blizzard should do with the gear and stuff when it comes to future patches? Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see all of you in the next one.